The dust devil danced across Main Street like a drunken ghost, picking up tumbleweeds and old newspapers before disappearing into the endless prairie. Caleb Morgan squinted against the afternoon sun, his weathered hand instinctively resting on the grip of his Colt .45. Deadwood Gulch sprawled before him, a collection of weathered buildings clinging to existence like stubborn weeds in the desert. The year was 1876, and the West was still wild enough to make a man forget his sins or die trying. Caleb's spurs clinked against the wooden boardwalk as he made his way past the Broken Wheel Saloon. Piano music spilled out through the batwing doors, mixing with raucous laughter and the occasional crash of breaking glass. He'd seen 100 towns like this one, each promising redemption or ruin, depending on which way the cards fell. "Another drifter," muttered Silas Pritchard, the town's self-appointed moral guardian, from his perch outside the general store. "Mark my words, that one's got blood on his hands." If only the old fool knew how right he was. Caleb had left enough ghosts behind to populate a cemetery Confederate gray and Union blue alike. The war had ended 11 years ago, but some battles never stopped raging in a man's soul. The sign above the modest 2-story building read, "Lane's Boarding House," in faded blue letters. It looked cleaner than most establishments in town, with actual glass windows instead of oiled paper and flower boxes that suggested someone still believed in beauty despite the harsh landscape. Caleb pushed through the door, setting off a small bell. The interior was a surprise clean-swept floors, gingham curtains, and the smell of fresh bread instead of the usual mixture of sweat, whiskey, and desperation that permeated most frontier establishments. A woman emerged from the back room, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron. Abigail Lane was not what Caleb expected. She couldn't have been more than 25, with honey-colored hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes the color of prairie sage. Pretty, yes, but it was the way she carried herself that caught his attention, straight-backed and steady, like someone who'd weathered storms and refused to bend. "Looking for a room." Her voice had a musical quality, but there was steel underneath. "Yes, ma'am. Heard you run a clean place." "I do. $2 a week. Includes breakfast and supper. No drinking in the rooms, no visitors after 9, and absolutely no gunplay. Break my rules. And you'll be camping with the coyotes." Despite himself, Caleb almost smiled. "Fair enough." She studied him with those green eyes, taking in the road dust, the well-worn gun belt, the careful way he had moved like a man always ready for trouble. "You have a name, Mr.?" "Caleb Morgan." "Well, Mr. Morgan, I'm Abigail Lane. Folks call me Abby." She turned to fetch the register. "You planning on staying long?" "Haven't decided yet." They never do. There was something in her tone, not quite bitterness, but a recognition of how things were. She'd clearly seen her share of drifters. As she wrote his name in the ledger, Caleb noticed the pale band of skin on her ring finger where a wedding band had once rested. The town gossips would later fill him in on the details how her husband, Thomas Lane, had been a mean drunk who'd gotten himself killed in a poker game 2 years back, leaving her with debts and a reputation stained by association. "Room's upstairs, second door on the right," she said, handing him a key. "Supper's at 6 sharp." Caleb nodded and headed up the narrow stairs. The room was sparse but clean iron bedstead, washstand, small table, and a window overlooking the dusty street. He set his saddlebags on the floor and tested the mattress. It had been weeks since he'd slept in a real bed. Through the thin walls, he could hear Abby moving around downstairs, the domestic sounds oddly comforting after so many nights under open sky. He'd planned to keep moving west, maybe California, somewhere the ghosts couldn't follow. But something about this place, or maybe something about that green-eyed woman with flour in her hair, made him reconsider. The peace didn't last long. Caleb was washing trail dust from his face when he heard the commotion horses thundering down Main Street. Whooping and hollering that meant trouble. He moved to the window in time to see 5 riders pull up in front of the boarding house, dust swirling around them like smoke. The leader dismounted with the easy grace of a man comfortable with violence. Elias Crow was everything Caleb had learned to recognize in the war, the kind of man who enjoyed the killing more than the cause, tall and lean, with a black beard and eyes like chips of coal. He wore his guns low and tied down, gunfighter style. "Mrs. Lane," Crow called out, his voice carrying the false friendliness of a snake oil salesman. "Come on out here, pretty lady. Time to discuss your financial obligations." Caleb heard quick footsteps below. Then the front door opening. He couldn't see Abby from his angle, but her voice carried clear. "I told you, Mr. Crow, I don't owe you anything. My husband's debts died with him." "Now that's where you're wrong, sweetheart." Crow's companions laughed 4 hard cases with faces the law probably knew well. "See, in my book, a wife inherits everything from her husband, the good and the bad. And old Tom, he owed me quite a sum before he caught that bullet. Even if that were true, which it isn't, I don't have that kind of money. Well now, I'm sure we can work out some kind of arrangement." The suggestion in his voice made Caleb's jaw tighten. "A pretty widow like you, all alone in this big house. I run a respectable establishment. Mr. Crow, now please leave." The crack of hand-meeting face was sharp as a gunshot. Caleb was moving before he'd made a conscious decision, buckling on his gun belt as he headed for the stairs. He found Abby on the porch, her hand pressed to her reddening cheek, facing down Crow and his men with remarkable composure. The outlaw noticed Caleb first, his eyes narrowing. Well, seems the widow's got herself a guard dog." Caleb stepped past Abby, positioning himself between her and the outlaws. "The lady asked you to leave. And who might you be?" "Just a man who doesn't like seeing women pushed around." Crow's hand drifted toward his gun. "You know who you're talking to." "Stranger." "Don't much care." The street had gone quiet. Caleb could feel eyes watching from windows and doorways, the whole town holding its breath. He'd been in this position too many times, knew how quickly it could go bad, but he also knew men like Crow show weakness, and they'd keep taking until there was nothing left. "Boys," Crow said to his men, never taking his eyes off Caleb. "Looks like we got ourselves a hero." One of the gang, a pockmarked youth trying to prove himself, went for his gun. Caleb's Colt cleared leather and roared before the kid's weapon was halfway out. The bullet caught him high in the shoulder, spinning him into the dust. The other outlaws froze, suddenly reassessing the situation. Caleb kept his smoking gun trained on Crow, who hadn't moved. "Your boy needs a doctor," Caleb said calmly. "I'd suggest you take him and ride out." Crow's face was a mask of cold fury. "You just signed your death warrant, stranger, and the widow's too." "Maybe, but not today." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Crow smiled, a thin, humorless thing. "Load up, Jimmy," he told his men. "We'll be back." They hauled the wounded outlaw onto his horse and mounted up. Crow turned in his saddle, touching the brim of his hat in mock courtesy. "Ma'am, we'll continue our conversation real soon." After they'd thundered off, Caleb holstered his gun and turned to find Abby staring at him, her face pale except for the red mark on her cheek. "You shouldn't have done that," she said quietly. "You don't know what you've just brought down on yourself." "I've dealt with worse than Elias Crow." "Have you?" Her green eyes searched his face. "Because Crow owns half this county, the sheriff looks the other way, and anyone who stands up to him tends to disappear or end up dead." "Then why stay?" She lifted her chin, that steel showing through again. "Because this is my home. I built something here, and I won't let men like Crow take it away." Caleb nodded slowly, recognizing a kindred spirit, someone else trying to build something new on the ashes of the past. Then I reckon you'll need that guard dog a while longer." For the first time since he'd met her, Abby smiled, just a small thing, but genuine. "I can't pay you much. Room and board's enough." "You don't even know me." "I know enough." She studied him again, then nodded. "Supper's still at 6. Mr. Morgan, and thank you." As she went back inside, Caleb remained on the porch, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. He'd meant to avoid trouble, to slip through this town like a ghost. Instead, he'd just painted a target on his back and tied himself to a green-eyed widow who made him remember what it felt like to want to protect something. The smart play was to saddle up and ride out tonight. But Caleb Morgan had stopped making smart plays the day he'd walked away from a war that had taken everything but his life. Maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to make a stand. Even if it killed him. Especially if it killed him. The dust devil returned, dancing through the empty street like it was celebrating. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and the sound seemed to carry all the loneliness and defiance of the frontier itself. Caleb Morgan had come to Deadwood Gulch looking for a place to rest. Instead, he'd found a war. The morning sun cast long shadows across the boarding house floor as Caleb descended the stairs. He'd barely slept, old habits keeping him alert to every creak and whisper in the night. The smell of coffee and bacon drew him to the dining room, where 3 other boarders sat at the long table, a traveling merchant named Cornelius Webb, an elderly schoolteacher called Miss Prudence, and a young bank clerk who introduced himself as Timothy Hartwell. "Heard about yesterday," Webb said around a mouthful of eggs. "Bold move, standing up to Crow like that." "Foolish is more like it," Miss Prudence added, though not unkindly. "That man's a plague on this town." Abby entered carrying a fresh pot of coffee, the bruise on her cheek now a purple shadow despite the powder she'd used to cover it. "Morning, Mr. Morgan. I trust you slept well." "Well enough, ma'am." She poured his coffee with steady hands, though he noticed the slight tremor when Timothy asked, "Mrs. Lane, do you think Crow will really come back?" "Men like Elias Crow always come back, Mr. Hartwell. It's just a question of when." She set the pot down with more force than necessary. "But this is still my establishment, and I won't have fear served alongside breakfast. Now, who needs more biscuits?" After the meal, Caleb helped clear the table despite Abby's protests. In the kitchen, away from the other boarders, she finally dropped her cheerful facade. "You should leave town," she said quietly, scrubbing a plate with unnecessary vigor. "Take your horse and ride out before Crow decides to make an example of you." "What about you?" "I've managed 2 years on my own. I can handle Crow. By giving him what he wants." The plate slipped from her hands, shattering on the floor. They both knelt to collect the pieces, their hands almost touching as they reached for the same shard. "What Thomas owed him," she began, then stopped. "It's more than money. My late husband was many things, Mr. Morgan, most of them unpleasant. But toward the end, he got involved with Crow's operations, letting them use our barn for stolen goods, providing alibis. When he died, Crow lost his safe house. Now he wants me to continue the arrangement. And if you refuse, then he'll take the boarding house and everything else." She stood, dumping the broken pieces in the waste bin. "Either way, I lose. At least if I leave town alive, I can start over somewhere else. Running doesn't solve anything. Trust me on that." She studied him with those keen green eyes, speaking from experience. Instead of answering, Caleb rolled up his sleeves to help with the dishes. Abby gasped softly at the scar saber cuts, bullet wounds, the map of violence written on his skin. "The war?" she asked. "Among other things." "Which side?" "Both. Neither. After a while, it stopped mattering." He plunged his hands into the soapy water. "I've been drifting for 11 years. Mrs. Lane. Running from ghosts. Looking for peace. You know what I learned. The past follows no matter how fast you ride. So you've decided to make your stand in my kitchen. Despite everything, he chuckled. There are worse places. They worked in companionable silence until the dishes were done. As Abby hung up her apron, she said, I should tell you about Thomas. If you're going to stay, you deserve to know what kind of reputation you're defending. Doesn't matter? It does. She moved to the window, gazing out at the dusty yard. Thomas Lane was handsome, charming, and mean as a rattlesnake when he drank, which was often. I was 17 when we married, too young and stupid to see past the charm. By the time I understood what he really was, I was trapped. Caleb remained quiet, recognizing the weight of confession. He gambled away everything, our savings, my mother's jewelry. Even tried to bet the boarding house once. I fought him on that. The only time I ever stood up to him. He blackened my eye and broke 2 ribs. But I kept the deed hidden. Her reflection in the window glass was hard as stone. When Dutch Collier shot him over a card game, the whole town expected me to weep and wail. Instead, I wore my best dress to his funeral and served lemonade afterward. That took courage or callousness. Ask anyone in town, they'll tell you Abigail Lane is cold as winter frost. Probably drove her husband to drink with her sharp tongue and willful ways. She turned from the window. So you see, Mr. Morgan, you're not protecting some innocent maiden. You're standing up for the town pariah. I've been called worse than a pariah's guard dog. Why? The question came out sharper than she'd intended. Why stay? Why risk your life for someone you don't even know? Caleb considered his words carefully. Maybe because I'm tired of not caring. Maybe because you remind me of someone I used to know, someone who deserved better than what life gave her. He paused. Or maybe I just don't like bullies. Before Abby could respond, the bell above the front door chimed. They both tensed, but it was only Walter Braddock, who ran the general store. Mrs. Lane, I need to speak with you. The portly man's face was flushed with anxiety. It's about your account. Abby's expression closed off. If you'll excuse me, Mr. Morgan. Caleb retreated to the front porch but could still hear Braddock's nervous voice. I'm sorry, Mrs. Lane, but Mr. Crow came by this morning. Said anyone extending you credit would answer to him. I've got a family to think of. I understand. Mr. Braddock, how much do I owe currently? $14.60. I'll have it to you by week's end. After Braddock scurried away, Caleb found Abby sitting at the kitchen table, her account book open before her. The columns of figures told a clear story: modest income, careful expenses, and a dwindling reserve that wouldn't last another month. He's cutting off your supplies, Caleb observed. It's his way, squeeze until there's no choice but to give in. She closed the ledger with a snap. Well, I've made preserves before. I can do it again. The rest of the day passed in tense normalcy. Caleb helped repair a broken shutter, hauled water from the well, and kept watch from various vantage points. The town seemed to hold its breath. People hurried about their business, avoiding eye contact, as if acknowledging the situation might make it worse. Sheriff Dawes made an appearance late in the afternoon, his tin star tarnished as his reputation. Morgan, he wheezed, climbing the porch steps. Heard you had a run-in with some local boys yesterday? If by local boys you mean Crow and his gang of thieves, then yes. Dawes fidgeted with his badge. Now see here, I run a peaceful town. Can't have drifters stirring up trouble. Seems to me the trouble was already here. Sheriff, you just chose to look the other way. The lawman's face reddened. You don't know how things work around here. Stranger, Crow's got connections all the way to the territorial capital. Cross him, and you'll find yourself on the wrong end of a rope, legal-like. Is that a threat? It's a friendly warning. Be smart. Move on. After Dawes left, Caleb found Abby in the garden, viciously attacking weeds with a hoe. He's not wrong, she said without looking up. Crow does have connections. Judges, politicians, even a federal marshal or two. Fighting him is like fighting the whole system. Every system has weak points. Spoken like a true military man. She straightened, wiping sweat from her brow. Were you an officer? Captain, later promoted to major, though by then there wasn't much left to command. Confederate. Started out that way, ended up fighting for whoever was fighting against the worst atrocities. He picked up a rake, helping clear the uprooted weeds. War has a way of blurring lines. Eventually, you realize both sides have their heroes and monsters. They worked side by side as the sun began its descent. There was something peaceful about the simple labor, the honest sweat, the shared purpose. Caleb found himself stealing glances at Abby the way she tucked escaped strands of hair behind her ear, the determined set of her jaw, the grace in her movements despite the hard work. You're staring, she said without looking at him. Sorry, ma'am. Don't be. It's been a long time since anyone looked at me without seeing Thomas Lane's widow or Crow's next victim. She paused in her work. What do you see? Mr. Morgan. A survivor. Someone who's been knocked down but keeps getting up. Someone worth defending. Their eyes met across the garden rows, and something passed between them, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of kindred spirits. The moment stretched until the sound of approaching horses shattered it. Inside, Caleb ordered, his hand already on his gun. But it wasn't Crow. Instead, a lone rider appeared, a young woman in men's clothing, her horse lathered from hard riding. Caleb, she called out, sliding from the saddle. Caleb Morgan. He stepped forward warily. Do I know you? No, but I've been tracking you for 3 months. She pulled off her hat, revealing auburn hair and a face that might have been pretty without the trail dust and exhaustion. Name's Rebecca Foster. I've got a message from Colonel Harrington. Caleb's blood ran cold. Harrington's dead. I was at his funeral. That's what everyone was supposed to think. Rebecca glanced nervously at the dying light. Is there somewhere we can talk private-like? There are men following me, and if they catch up... She didn't need to finish. Abby stepped forward. Any enemy of Caleb's pursuers is welcome here. Come inside. Miss Foster, you look like you could use a meal and a safe place to rest. As they ushered the mysterious rider inside, Caleb caught Abby's arm. This could bring more trouble than Crow. Then we'll face that too, she said simply. I'm tired of being afraid. Mr. Morgan, if we're going to make a stand, we might as well make it count. Looking into her fierce green eyes, Caleb felt something shift inside him, a wall crumbling, a door opening. For the first time in 11 years, he had something worth fighting for besides his own survival. And that terrified him more than all of Crow's guns combined. The next morning brought a sandstorm that turned the sky the color of dried blood. Caleb stood at the boarding house window, watching tumbleweeds race down the empty street while Rebecca Foster slept off her exhaustion upstairs. Her message from the supposedly dead Colonel Harrington had been brief but troubling, something about unfinished business from the war and debts that needed settling. More coffee? Abby appeared at his elbow, pot in hand. Thank you. He accepted the refill gratefully. Storm's getting worse. These can last for days sometimes. At least it'll keep Crow and his men holed up. She stood beside him, close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she used. Your friend seems to have brought her own troubles. She's not my friend, just someone from before. The war follows you everywhere, doesn't it? Some of us carry it more than others. He turned from the window. I should leave. Take Rebecca and whatever ghosts she's dragging behind her. You don't need this on top of Crow. Where would you go? Somewhere far from here. And then what, another town? Another boarding house? Another reason to keep running? Abby set down the coffee pot with unnecessary force. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday about the past following no matter how fast you ride. Maybe it's time we'd both stopped running. Before Caleb could respond, footsteps on the stairs announced Rebecca's arrival. She'd cleaned up, revealing a handsome woman in her late 20s with sharp intelligence in her hazel eyes. "Morning," she said, gratefully accepting coffee from Abby. "Storm's a piece of luck. Should slow down Benson's men." "Who's Benson?" Caleb asked. "Major Theodore Benson. You remember him?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "I remember. Last I heard, he was running carpetbagger operations in Georgia. He's moved up in the world. Now he's buying judges and stealing land grants across 3 territories." Rebecca pulled out a leather folder. "Harrington's been gathering evidence for years. Problem is, Benson found out he was alive and sent killers after him. The colonel's in hiding, but he needs someone he can trust to finish this. And he chose me. You're one of the few who knows where all the bodies are buried literally." She pushed the folder across the table. "Look at it. Caleb. Names, dates, accounts of what really happened at Millbrook Ridge." Millbrook Ridge. The name hit Caleb like a physical blow. Abby must have noticed his reaction because she quietly excused herself, leaving them alone. "That was 12 years ago," Caleb said finally. "Tell that to the families of the 200 Confederate prisoners Benson massacred, or the Union soldiers who tried to stop him and ended up in unmarked graves." Rebecca leaned forward. "You testified at the inquiry, but Benson had friends in high places. They buried the report, promoted him, and painted you as a malcontent. Now he's using the same tactics on civilians: intimidation, violence, murder." Caleb opened the folder reluctantly. The documents inside brought back memories he'd tried to drown in whiskey and distance orders in Benson's handwriting, witness statements, a list of the dead. "What does Harrington want me to do?" "There's a federal prosecutor in Denver, William Thornton. He's clean, and he's building a case against Benson's whole network, but he needs someone who was there, someone whose testimony can't be dismissed as hearsay. My testimony wasn't worth much 12 years ago. Times have changed. The war's been over long enough that people are willing to hear the truth about what happened." Rebecca glanced toward the window, where sand rattled against the glass. "Benson's men are maybe a day behind me. If you agree to help, we need to leave soon." Caleb closed the folder. "I need to think about it." "Don't think too long. Lives depend on this, including yours, once Benson knows you're involved." After Rebecca returned upstairs, Caleb found Abby in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with unusual violence. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," he said. "Are you—" She didn't look up. "Or are you sorry I'm seeing who you really are?" "What's that supposed to mean?" She finally faced him, flour dusting her hands. "It means you're not the only one running from the past, Caleb Morgan, but at least I stay in one place while I do it. You carry your guilt like a badge, using it as an excuse to never connect with anyone or anything. You don't understand. 200 prisoners I understand perfectly. You tried to stop something terrible and failed. So now you drift through life, playing the mysterious gunman, never staying long enough for anyone to matter." Her words stung because they held truth. "And what about you hiding behind your account books and proper manners, pretending you're not dying inside from loneliness?" "At least I'm trying to build something." "In a town that despises you under the thumb of a man like Crow?" "Yes." The word came out as almost a shout. "Because that's what courage looks like, not gun battles and dramatic stands, but getting up every day and facing the small defeats and smaller victories. It's choosing to hope when you have every reason not to." They stood facing each other across the kitchen, both breathing hard. The tension crackled between them like lightning before a storm. "I should go," Caleb said finally. "Yes, you should. Take your war and your guilt and your mysterious rider. Leave before—" Her voice cracked. "Before I start believing you might stay." Instead of leaving, Caleb crossed the space between them. "What if I did stay?" "Don't—" She backed against the counter. "Don't make promises you won't keep. I'm not good at staying. Abby, I'm not good at this. He gestured helplessly between them. Neither am I. Thomas saw to that. Her green eyes were bright with unshed tears. But I'm willing to try if... The kitchen door burst open. Timothy Hartwell stumbled in, eyes wide with panic. Mrs. Lane Riders coming, looks like Crow's whole gang. Through the howling sandstorm, Caleb could make out shapes moving down Main Street. A dozen men, maybe more, bandanas pulled up against the blowing grit. They wouldn't dare attack in broad daylight. Abby breathed. Storm gives them cover. Caleb said grimly, no witnesses if visibility's this bad. He turned to Timothy. Get upstairs. Tell Miss Foster and the other boarders to stay in their rooms, away from windows. What are you going to do? Caleb checked his Colt, then the Winchester he'd kept near the door. What I always do? Make a stand. Not alone. Abby moved to the cabinet where she kept household supplies, pulling out something wrapped in oilcloth, a Remington .32 pocket revolver. This was my father's. I know how to use it. Abby, my house, my fight. She met his gaze steadily. We do this together or not at all. Before he could argue, glass shattered in the front parlor. A torch sailed through. Spreading flames across the oriental rug Abby took such pride in. Fire, someone shouted outside. Better come out, widow woman, before your whole place burns. Caleb grabbed a bucket of sand they kept for such emergencies, dousing the flames before they could spread. Through the broken window, he could see Crow's men spreading out, taking positions. Morgan, Crow's voice carried despite the wind. This ain't your business. Send out the woman, and you can ride away. Like hell, Caleb muttered. To Abby, back door, we can... No, she squared her shoulders. I won't run from my own home. More windows shattered. This time, the torches were followed by gunfire, forcing them to duck. In the chaos, neither noticed Rebecca Foster slipping down the stairs, her own rifle in hand. 3 guns are better than 2, she said, crouching beside them. This isn't your fight, Caleb told her. Benson's men are coming anyway. Might as well make our stand here as anywhere. She peered through a bullet hole. Besides, I like your lady. Takes spine to face down vultures like these. She's not my... Caleb began, but Abby cut him off with a look. Less talking, more shooting. The battle for the boarding house had begun. Lead flew like horizontal rain, punching through walls and shattering what glass remained. Caleb had fought in worse situations, but never with so much at stake. Every shot that came near Abby made his blood run cold. They gave as good as they got. Caleb's Winchester barked steadily. Rebecca proved to be a crack shot, and even Abby's smaller gun found its mark, wounding one attacker who got too close to the porch. The roof, Rebecca shouted. They're trying to set the roof on fire. Black smoke began seeping through the ceiling. If the upper floor caught, they'd be forced out into the open, easy targets in the swirling sand. Water buckets in the kitchen. Abby said, I'll go. Together. Caleb insisted. Rebecca, cover us. They made it to the kitchen, grabbing the emergency buckets, but the smoke was thickening. Upstairs, they could hear panicked voices, the other boarders trapped by the flames. Get them out the back, Caleb ordered. I'll hold the front. Caleb. He caught her face between his hands, heedless of the danger. I'm not running anymore. Abby, not from this, not from you. Now go. She kissed him quick and fierce, then ran for the stairs. Caleb turned back to the fight with renewed determination. These men thought they could burn out the woman he loved. The word surprised him, but he didn't have time to examine it. He shot out the front door, driving back 2 men trying to rush the entrance. His rifle clicked empty. As he reached for his pistol, a figure loomed through the smoke, Elias Crow himself, gun drawn. Should have minded your own business, Morgan. They fired simultaneously. Caleb felt the bullet tug at his shirt as his own shot took Crow in the shoulder, spinning him back into the storm. "Boss is hit," someone yelled. "Pull back." The attack faltered. Through the swirling sand and smoke, Caleb could see the outlaws retreating, dragging their wounded leader. They'd won for now. He found Abby in the backyard with the evacuated boarders, her face streaked with soot but unharmed. When she saw him, she ran into his arms, heedless of propriety. "The house?" he asked. "Damaged but standing, like us." They stood holding each other as the storm began to ease. The immediate danger passed, but both knowing this was far from over. Crow would return. Benson's men were still coming, and the peaceful life Caleb had briefly imagined seemed more distant than ever. But as Abby pulled back to look at him, her green eyes fierce with determination, he realized something had changed. He'd found something worth fighting for, not just a cause or a principle, but a person, a future. "So," she said with a shaky smile, "are you staying? Try to make me leave." In the distance, thunder rolled across the prairie, or perhaps it was the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Either way, the storm was far from over. But for the first time in years, Caleb Morgan was ready to weather it. The evening after the attack found the boarding house in a state of controlled chaos. Neighbors who had hidden during the gunfight now emerged to help, bringing boards for the broken windows and buckets of water for the charred roof. Even those who normally shunned Abby seemed moved by her refusal to surrender. Doc Holcomb tended to the wounded, mostly cuts from flying glass and burns from fighting the fire. Caleb sat shirtless on a kitchen chair as the elderly physician examined the bullet graze along his ribs. "Half an inch closer and we'd be measuring you for a pine box," Holcomb muttered, threading his needle. "Hold still." Through the doorway, Caleb could see Abby directing repairs with quiet efficiency, her hair coming loose from its pins, soot still smudging her cheek. Every time someone thanked her or offered sympathy, she simply nodded and pointed them to the next task. "She's something," Rebecca observed, entering with fresh bandages. "Most women would be in hysterics after what happened." "Abby's not most women." "I can see that." Rebecca lowered her voice. "Benson's men will be here by tomorrow night, maybe sooner. You sure you want to make your stand here?" "Where else would I go?" "Denver, meet with Thornton. Give your testimony. Let the law handle this properly." Caleb winced as the doctor pulled the first stitch tight. "The law's had 12 years to handle it properly. Besides, I'm not leaving Abby to face Crow alone." "She could come with us." "And abandon everything she's built. You don't know her like—" He caught himself. "Like you do," Rebecca smiled sadly. "No, I suppose I don't. When did it happen? When did the infamous lone wolf Caleb Morgan finally let someone past his guard?" He didn't answer, but his eyes found Abby again through the doorway. She was talking with Walter Braddock, who had sheepishly returned to offer credit at his store, as if feeling his gaze. She looked up, and something passed between them, a warmth that made his chest tighten in ways that had nothing to do with Doc Holcomb's needle. Later, after the helpers had gone and the boarders had retired, Caleb found himself alone with Abby in what remained of her parlor. They'd salvaged what furniture they could, but the room still smelled of smoke and gunpowder. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for staying." "Thank you for asking me to." They sat on the partially scorched settee, maintaining a proper distance despite everything they'd shared. The oil lamp cast dancing shadows on the wall, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. "Tell me about her," Abby said suddenly, "the woman I remind you of." Caleb was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Sarah. Her name was Sarah, my brother's wife." "You loved her." "Everyone loved Sarah. She had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the world when she smiled at you." He stared at his hands. "When the war came, my brother joined up first. Confederate cavalry. Same unit as me. Sarah begged us not to go, but honor and duty and all those fine words young men die for. What happened? My brother was killed at Chickamauga. I brought his body home. Had to tell Sarah. His voice roughened. She just looked at me with those big eyes and asked why it wasn't me instead. Why I got to live when better men died. Caleb. She was right. My brother was the better man. Kinder, gentler. The one who should have survived. He finally met Abby's eyes. Sarah died of grief 6 months later. 22 years old. Beautiful as spring rain. And she just faded away. Abby reached for his hand. And you've been trying to die ever since. Taking every dangerous job. Picking every fight. Hoping someone will finally put you out of your misery. Until now. What's different about now? Instead of answering with words, Caleb turned toward her, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. She leaned into the touch, her eyes fluttering closed. Abby, and I know, she whispered. I know all the reasons this is foolish. You're planning to leave with Rebecca. I have Crow to deal with. We barely know each other. I know your favorite tea is chamomile with honey. I know you hum when you're happy and go silent when you're scared. I know you keep your husband's mandolin in the closet but never play it because the memories hurt too much. Her eyes flew open. How? I pay attention. To the way you bite your lip when you're concentrating on your account books. To how you always save the best portions of food for your boarders. To the sadness that creeps in when you think no one's looking. Caleb, please. I know you're the strongest woman I've ever met, and that terrifies me because I don't know if I'm strong enough for you. The space between them disappeared. The kiss was different from their desperate embrace during the attack, slower, deeper. A confession and a promise rolled into one. When they finally parted, both were breathing unsteadily. Stay with me tonight, Abby whispered. Not like that. Just stay. I don't want to be alone. Caleb nodded, and they made their way upstairs to her room, a modest space that still showed a woman's touch despite the practicalities of frontier life. Dried wildflowers in a jar. A quilt that must have taken months to stitch. A small daguerreotype of a couple Caleb assumed were her parents. Abby disappeared behind the changing screen while Caleb stood awkwardly by the window, checking the street out of habit more than real concern. When she emerged in her nightgown and wrapper, her hair unpinned and falling past her shoulders, his breath caught. You're staring again, she said softly. Can't help it. She moved to the bed, pulling back the covers. This doesn't mean I'm not ready for... I know, neither am I. It was true. After so many years of emptiness, the simple intimacy of sharing space felt like stepping off a cliff. They lay side by side in the dark, not touching but aware of every breath, every shift of weight. The house creaked around them, still settling after the day's violence. Tell me about the mandolin, Caleb said quietly. Abby was silent so long he thought she'd fallen asleep. Then, Thomas played it when we were courting. He had beautiful hands, long fingers that could make that little instrument sing, I fell in love with the music before I fell in love with the man. What changed? The music stopped. After we married, he pawned the mandolin for gambling money. I bought it back, hid it, thought maybe if I kept it safe, the man who'd played it would come back. She laughed bitterly. Foolish! Hope isn't foolish. Isn't it I hoped Thomas would change? I hoped the town would forget. I hoped someone would see me as more than damaged goods. She turned toward him in the darkness. Then you walked through my door, all dust and danger and wounded eyes, and I thought maybe hope was just another word for torture. And now, her hand found his across the space between them. Now I think maybe hope is just stubborn enough to outlast the pain. They lay in comfortable silence, hands linked, listening to the night sounds whine through broken boards, the distant saloon piano, life going on despite everything. Caleb, Abby's voice was growing drowsy. What happens tomorrow? We face it together. And the day after, That too. You're not very good at planning ahead, are you? Never saw much point in it before. And now, he squeezed her hand gently. Now I'm thinking about fixing your porch steps. They've been squeaking since I got here. She laughed a real laugh, free and unexpected. Of all the things to think about, a man's got to start somewhere. Figure if I'm planning on porch repairs, I must be planning on staying. Are you planning on staying? The question hung in the air like smoke. Before Caleb could answer, footsteps pounded up the stairs. Rebecca burst in without knocking, rifle in hand. They're here, she gasped. Benson's men, at least 8 riders, moving in from the north. They must have ridden through the night. Caleb was already reaching for his boots. How long? 20 minutes, maybe less. Abby sat up, clutching her wrapper closed. I'll wake the others. Get them out the back again. No. Caleb's voice was firm. This is my fight. Benson wants me, not them. Our fight, Abby corrected. This is our home, our stand, our choice. Rebecca looked between them, understanding dawning. So, that's how it is. Well, if we're all choosing to die together, we'd better make it count. As the women hurried to prepare, Caleb stood at the window watching the horizon. 8 men plus whatever remained of Crow's gang would be impossible odds. But looking back at Abby as she efficiently loaded her father's pistol, hair wild around her shoulders, face set with determination, he felt an unexpected peace. He'd spent 12 years looking for a place to die. Instead, he'd found a reason to live. Now all he had to do was survive the night. The lamp flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. In the distance, hoofbeats thundered closer, bringing the past crashing into the present. Caleb checked his guns and prepared for one more war. Dawn broke gray and hostile over Deadwood Gulch, matching the mood that had settled over the town like a shroud. News of Caleb and Abby's relationship had spread faster than wildfire, carried on the lips of gossips and amplified by those who delighted in scandal. And Caleb stood on the boarding house porch, watching Martha Pritchard march down Main Street with a group of town women, their faces pinched with righteous indignation. They stopped just short of the property line, whispering behind gloved hands while shooting dark looks at the windows. Shameless, he heard one mutter, carrying on while her husband's barely cold in the ground. What else would you expect? Another replied. Blood always tells. Her mother was no better. The words were meant to carry, meant to wound. Inside, Caleb could hear Abby moving about the kitchen, pretending not to notice the gathering crowd. But he'd seen the tightness around her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she'd served breakfast. The previous night's confrontation with Benson's men had ended in an uneasy standoff. They'd camped outside town, sending word that they wanted Caleb, not a bloodbath. Sheriff Dawes had actually done his job for once, convincing them to wait for proper procedures, but everyone knew it was only a temporary reprieve. Mrs. Lane, Martha Pritchard's shrill voice cut through the morning air. We'd like a word. Abby emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. She stood tall despite the hostile faces before her. Good morning, Mrs. Pritchard, ladies. Don't you good morning us. Martha snapped. We've come to express our concern about the moral atmosphere of this establishment. I run a clean, respectable boarding house, as I always have. Respectable Prudence Weatherby laughed harshly. With that gunman warming your bed not 3 years after poor Thomas died. Caleb moved to intervene, but Abby's slight gesture stopped him. What happens under my roof is my business, Abby said evenly. If you have paying guests to recommend, I'd be happy to discuss rates. Otherwise, I'll thank you to remove yourselves from my property. Your property, Martha's face flushed. For now, perhaps, but this town has ways of dealing with women who forget their place. Is that a threat, Mrs. Pritchard? It's a promise, No decent person will patronize this den of sin. We'll see you starved out before we allow such brazen immorality to corrupt our community." The group swept away in a rustle of petticoats and moral superiority. Abby stood frozen until they'd gone, then sagged against the porch rail. "I'm sorry," Caleb said quietly. "For what? For being here, for making me feel alive for the first time in years?" She straightened, fire returning to her eyes. "I won't apologize for that, not to them, not to anyone." But the damage was already spreading. Timothy Hartwell awkwardly gave notice that morning, unable to meet Abby's eyes as he mumbled about finding lodgings elsewhere. By noon, Miss Prudence had packed her bags, leaving only Cornelius Webb and he, only because he was too drunk to care about scandal. "Maybe I should leave," Rebecca suggested over a tense lunch. "My presence is only making things worse." "Running won't solve anything," Abby said firmly. "They'd just find another reason to hate me." Through the window, they could see more townspeople gathering men now, their faces dark with a particular anger reserved for women who didn't know their place. Caleb recognized the mood. He'd seen it before in other towns. Other times, fear and righteousness made a dangerous combination. "They're working themselves up," he observed. "Let them," Abby said, but her bravado was wearing thin. The afternoon brought worse news. Young Billy Chen, who did odd jobs around town, arrived with a message from the bank. "Mr. Harmon says your loan's being called in," the boy reported, clearly uncomfortable. "Says you got 2 weeks to pay in full or—" He couldn't finish. "Or he'll foreclose." Abby completed, "Thank you, Billy." After the boy left, she slumped at the kitchen table. $800. Might as well be 8,000. "How much do you have?" Rebecca asked. $43 and some change. Thomas left debts. "You see, I've been paying them off slowly, but—" She gestured helplessly. Caleb felt rage building in his chest, not the hot anger of battle, but the cold fury of watching injustice unfold. "This is because of me." "No," Abby's voice was fierce. "This is because narrow-minded people can't stand seeing a woman choose her own path. You just gave them an excuse." A commotion outside drew them to the window. A crowd had gathered in the street, Elias Crow at its center despite his wounded arm. He was speaking, gesturing toward the boarding house, and the crowd's mood was turning uglier by the minute. "Harboring fugitives and murderers," Crow's voice carried clearly. "My boys were just trying to collect a lawful debt when Morgan gunned them down, and now he's holed up in there with his fellow killers, corrupting the widow while they plan more violence." "That's a lie," someone shouted Doc Holcomb, pushing through the crowd. "I was here. Crow's men attacked first." "Are you calling me a liar, old man?" Crow's hand dropped to his gun. "I'm calling you what you are, a thief and a bully who's poisoned this town for too long." Others began speaking up, the baker whose daughter Crow's men had hassled, the Mexican family whose well had been poisoned when they couldn't pay protection. But they were outnumbered by those who'd rather side with the devil they knew than risk change. "Enough talk," someone yelled. "If the sheriff won't do his job, we will." The mob surged forward. Caleb grabbed his rifle, but Abby caught his arm. No more violence. That's what they want, an excuse to destroy everything. Then what? She moved to the door, throwing it open before Caleb could stop her. The crowd faltered, not expecting her to face them directly. "You want me gone?" she called out, her voice carrying clear and strong. "Fine, but I'll walk out on my own terms, with my head high. I won't be driven out like an animal." "Abby, no!" Caleb growled, but she continued. "I've lived in this town my whole life. I've served you meals, tended your sick, listened to your troubles, and this is how you repay me, with torches and threats." She looked directly at faces she knew. "Walter Braddock, I helped your Sarah when consumption nearly took her. Jedediah Smith, I gave you credit when the drought ruined your crops. Is this your thanks?" Some in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, but Crow wasn't done. "Pretty words from a pretty witch," he sneered. "But we know what you really are, just like your mother spreading your legs for any man with a gun and a—" The crack of Abby's palm against his face silenced the street. Crow's eyes went dark with rage, and he backhanded her, sending her stumbling. That was all Caleb needed. He burst from the house, catching Abby as she fell, then turning on Crow with murder in his eyes. "Touch her again and you're dead." Big talk from a man surrounded by my friends. Crow spat, but something had shifted. The sight of Crow striking Abby had crossed a line, even for some who'd come to drive her out. Murmurs of disapproval rippled through the crowd. "This isn't right," someone muttered. "Since when do we hit women?" another added. Sheriff Dawes finally appeared, huffing from the exertion. "All right, that's enough. Everyone go home before I start making arrests." "On whose authority?" Crow demanded. "On the authority of common decency." The voice came from an unexpected source, Judge Samuel Fairweather, pushing through the crowd. The elderly jurist rarely involved himself in town disputes, but his word carried weight. "I've watched this town tear itself apart with fear and hatred for too long. It ends now." He looked directly at Crow. "You and your men have 24 hours to leave town. Any violence before then, and I'll personally see you hang." "You can't?" "I can, and I will. I may be old, but I still know right from wrong." He turned to the crowd. "And the rest of you should be ashamed. This woman has shown more courage than all of you combined. Go home and think about what kind of town you want to live in." The crowd began to disperse, shamefaced. Crow lingered, his eyes promising retribution, before stalking off with his remaining men. Judge Fairweather approached Abby, who was holding a handkerchief to her split lip. "I apologize for not speaking up sooner, Mrs. Lane. Sometimes it takes a crisis to remind us who we really are." As the judge departed, Caleb helped Abby inside. Rebecca had watched everything from the window, her face thoughtful. "That was brave," she told Abby. "Foolish, but brave." "I'm tired of being afraid," Abby replied. "Tired of apologizing for existing." But the victory felt hollow. They'd gained a day's reprieve. But the fundamental problems remained. Crow would return. The bank would foreclose. And half the town still wanted them gone. That evening, as Abby tended the boarding house's few remaining guests, Caleb found her in the garden. The sunset painted everything golden, making her hair glow like honey. "We need to talk," he said. "I know." She didn't look at him. "You're going to tell me all the logical reasons why you should leave. How it would be better for everyone. Actually, I was going to ask if you'd marry me." The watering can slipped from her hands, water splashing across the tomatoes. "What?" "It's not how I planned to ask. Hell, I hadn't planned to ask at all. But standing in that street, watching you face down a mob," he moved closer. "I realized I don't want to face another fight without you beside me. Not Crow, not Benson, not the whole damn world." "Caleb, you don't have to—" "I want to. Question is, do you—" She finally met his eyes, and he saw tears there. "You realize marrying me would make everything worse. The scandal, the gossip." "Let them talk. I've faced Confederate cavalry charges. A few gossiping biddies don't scare me. What about Benson, the war you're still fighting?" "We'll face that too, together, if you'll have me." Abby was quiet for a long moment. "Then ask me properly." "Despite everything," Caleb smiled. He dropped to one long knee there in the garden dirt, taking her hand. "Abigail Lane, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I can't promise an easy life, but I promise I'll stand beside you through whatever comes." "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, "Yes." He stood and kissed her, tasting tears and hope and the faint copper of her split lip. Around them, the garden seemed to glow in the dying light, a small Eden in the midst of chaos. They had no ring, no proper announcement, no idea what tomorrow would bring. But standing there, holding each other as night fell over Deadwood Gulch. They had something more valuable, a partnership forged in fire, tested by adversity, and strong enough to face whatever storms were still to come. The sun hung low and red as blood over the canyon, painting the rocks in shades of rust and shadow. Caleb crouched behind an outcropping of sandstone, watching the dust cloud that marked Crow's approach. The outlaw had chosen his ground well. Devil's Canyon, a maze of narrow passages and blind corners where numbers meant less than knowledge of the terrain. "I count 12 riders," Rebecca whispered from her position above, her rifle steady on a natural gun rest formed by the rocks. "Crow's in the lead." The plan had been simple: meet Crow away from town to prevent civilian casualties. What Caleb hadn't expected was for Abby to insist on coming, or for half the town to follow, despite his warnings. "You shouldn't be here," he told Abby for the 10th time. "Neither should you," she replied, checking her father's revolver. "But here we are." Below them, young Danny Morrison, all of 8 years old, huddled with his mother behind a boulder. The boy had been playing near the old mine when Crow's men grabbed him, using him as bait to draw Caleb out. Now the child whimpered softly, clutching a wooden soldier to his chest. "It'll be all right, sweetheart, Mrs." Morrison whispered, though her own face was pale with terror. The cruelty of using a child made Caleb's blood burn cold. During the war, he'd seen too many innocents caught in the crossfire. He'd sworn never again, but here he was, watching history repeat. "Morgan!" Crow's voice echoed off the canyon walls. "I know you're up there. Send down the woman and we'll let the brat go." "The only thing I'm sending down is lead," Caleb called back. Crow laughed an ugly sound that sent chills down spines. "Have it your way, boys. Light it up." Gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes strobing in the gathering dusk. Bullets whined off rocks, filling the air with stone chips and powder smoke. Caleb returned fire methodically, making each shot count. His Winchester barked once, and a rider tumbled from his saddle. On the left side, Rebecca warned. 3 of Crow's men were trying to flank them, scrambling up the loose scree. Abby surprised everyone, including herself, by dropping one with a lucky shot. The other 2 dove for cover. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" Caleb asked. "I've been practicing," she admitted. "After Thomas died, I figured a woman alone should know how to defend herself." The battle settled into a deadly rhythm. Crow's men had superior numbers, but Caleb had chosen their position well. The narrow approach meant the outlaws couldn't rush them en masse, and the failing light worked in the defenders' favor. Then Caleb heard something that made his heart stop, Danny Morrison crying out in fear. "Papa, help me." In the confusion, one of Crow's men had circled around and grabbed the boy, dragging him into the open despite his mother's desperate attempts to hold on. "Got your attention now? Morgan," Crow called. "Here's the deal: you come down, and the boy goes free. Keep fighting, and, well, accidents happen in crossfires." The outlaw holding Danny was a mean-looking customer named Reb Fowler, known for his cruelty. He held the boy like a shield, gun pressed to the child's temple. Danny's eyes were wide with terror, tears cutting trails through the dust on his face. "Don't hurt him, Mrs." Morrison screamed. "Please, he's just a baby." Caleb felt the familiar weight of command decision, the kind that had haunted him since the war. Save the child and likely die, or keep fighting and risk an innocent life. But looking at Abby's stricken face, he knew there was really no choice at all. "I'm coming down," he called. "Just don't hurt the boy." "Caleb, no." Abby grabbed his arm. "It's what they want." "I know." He touched her face gently. "But I can't let them hurt a child. Not again." Again. Millbrook Ridge. There were children in the prison camp families who'd been arrested as Confederate sympathizers when Benson ordered the executions. He shook his head. "I tried to stop it. Failed. I won't fail again." He started to rise, but Rebecca pulled him back. "Wait, I've got an angle on Fowler. When you step out, He'll relax for just a second. That's a hell of a risk. So is surrendering to Crow. She sighted down her rifle. Trust me, I didn't track you for 3 months to watch you die in some canyon. Caleb squeezed Abby's hand once more, then stood slowly, hands visible but near his guns. I'm coming down. Crow, just keep your word. He picked his way down the slope, every nerve screaming danger. Behind him, he could feel Abby watching, feel her fear and love like a physical weight. 20 yards. 15. 10. That's far enough, Crow said, smiling like a snake. Drop the gun belt. Let the boy go first. You're not in a position to negotiate. Then we've got a problem. The moment stretched taut. Danny whimpered again, and Fowler shifted his grip slightly, the tiny relaxation Rebecca had been waiting for. Her rifle cracked. Fowler's head snapped back, and he crumpled, releasing Danny. The boy ran screaming toward his mother as all hell broke loose. Caleb's gun seemed to leap into his hands of their own accord. His first shot took Crow in the shoulder, the same one he'd wounded before spinning the outlaw leader around. His second caught another man center mass. But Crow's men were shooting too, and Caleb was exposed in the open. He felt a bullet tug at his sleeve, another kick up dirt by his boot. He dove and rolled, finding scant cover behind a fallen log. Above, Abby and Rebecca poured fire into the outlaws, but they were taking return fire now. Caleb saw Abby flinch as rock fragments peppered her face, saw Rebecca grimly working her rifle's lever as bullets sparked around her. The canyon mouth, someone shouted. Riders coming! Through the gun smoke and chaos, Caleb saw Salvation Judge Fairweather leading a posse of townsmen, including some who'd been in the mob just days before. They'd finally found their courage, or perhaps their shame had driven them to act. Caught between two forces, Crow's gang began to crumble. Some threw down their weapons, others tried to flee deeper into the canyon, only to find it was a box with no exit. Crow himself, wounded and cornered, made a last desperate play. Lurching to his feet, he aimed at Abby's position with his good arm. If I'm going to hell, I'm taking your woman with me. Time seemed to slow. Caleb was moving, knowing he was too far away. The gun in Crow's hand steadied. His finger tightened on the trigger. The shot echoed through the canyon. Crow staggered, looking down in surprise at the spreading red stain on his chest. Behind him, young Timothy Hartwell stood with a smoking pistol, his face pale but determined. Nobody threatens Mrs. Lane, the bank clerk said quietly. Crow fell to his knees, then forward, his reign of terror ending in the dust of Devil's Canyon. Around him, his remaining men surrendered, hands high and weapons discarded. Caleb rushed up the slope to find Abby shaken but unharmed. She fell into his arms, both of them trembling with the aftermath of violence and near loss. Is it over? She whispered. This part is... below... Mrs. Morrison clutched Danny, covering his face with kisses while the boy assured everyone he was brave like the soldiers. Doc Holcomb moved among the wounded, doing what he could. Judge Fairweather supervised the arrest of the surviving outlaws, but Caleb's attention was drawn to movement on the Ridge 8 riders silhouetted against the dying light. Watching, even at this distance, he recognized the military bearing, the disciplined formation. Benson's men. They watched for a long moment, then turned and rode away. The message was clear. Crow had been a sideshow. The main event was still to come. Who were they? Abby asked, following his gaze. Ghosts, Caleb said. But we'll deal with them tomorrow. Rebecca joined them, her face grim. They'll be back. Benson doesn't give up. Neither do we, Abby said firmly. We've come too far to quit now. As they made their way down to join the others, Caleb marveled at the change in the townspeople. Men who'd been ready to burn out Abby were now shaking her hand, thanking her for her courage. Women who'd snubbed her were asking if she was hurt, offering help with repairs. "Amazing what a little gunfire does for perspective," Doc Holcomb observed dryly. Timothy Hartwell approached hesitantly. "Mrs. Lane, Mr. Morgan, I owe you both an apology. I was a coward before, leaving when you needed support. I'd like to make amends, if you'll let me." "You saved my life," Abby said. "I'd say we're even." "No, ma'am, but it's a start." He turned to Caleb. "Those men on the ridge, they'll be trouble, won't they?" "Most likely." "Then you'll need all the help you can get. I may not be much with a gun, but I'm good with numbers. Maybe I can help with that foreclosure business." It was full dark by the time they returned to town. The boarding house looked different somehow, not just the boarded windows and bullet holes, but something more. It no longer seemed isolated, standing apart. Instead, it felt like part of the community, tested by fire and found worthy. "We should set watches," Rebecca said. "Benson might try something tonight." "I don't think so," Caleb said. "He's a strategist. He'll want to do this legally if he can. Use the system he's corrupted. But you're right, we should be ready." They organized shifts, townsmen volunteering to stand guard. As midnight approached, Caleb found himself on the porch with Abby, wrapped in a blanket against the cool night air. "We won today," she said softly. "A battle, not the war." "Still, it's something. Danny's safe, Crow's gone, and the town—" She gestured at the men patrolling the street. "They're finally standing up." "Because you showed them how." She leaned into him, fitting perfectly against his side. "We showed them, together." In the distance, a train whistle sounded the late freight heading west, carrying hopes and dreams and sometimes nightmares. Caleb thought about all the trains he'd ridden, all the towns he'd passed through, all the fights he'd walked away from. "No more running." "I love you," he said quietly, the words still foreign on his tongue, but feeling more right each time. "I love you too," she replied. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles, but Caleb found comfort in their constancy. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: Benson's revenge, the foreclosure, the long reckoning with the past. But tonight, holding the woman he loved while their town kept watch, he felt something he hadn't experienced in over a decade. Peace. It wouldn't last. Peace never did in his experience. But for now, for these precious hours before the storm, it was enough. The morning after the canyon battle dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself was celebrating Crow's defeat. But Caleb woke with a deep unease, the kind that had saved his life more times than he could count. Beside him, on the narrow bed, Abby stirred, her hair spreading across the pillow like spun honey. They'd been married 3 days now. A quiet ceremony performed by Judge Fairweather with Rebecca and Doc Holcomb as witnesses. No fancy dress or reception, just simple vows exchanged in the boarding house parlor, with its patched walls bearing witness to all they'd endured. "You're thinking too loud," Abby murmured, not opening her eyes. "Sorry, old habits." She propped herself on an elbow, studying his face. "Benson. He's out there, planning. A man like him doesn't give up." "Neither do we." She touched the healing cut on his cheek from the canyon fight. "We've faced worse odds." "Have we?" Caleb sat up, reaching for his shirt. "Crow was a thug. Benson's different, smart, connected, patient. He's got the law in his pocket and time on his side." A knock interrupted them. Rebecca's voice came through the door. "Caleb, we've got company." They dressed quickly and found Rebecca in the kitchen with Timothy Hartwell, who looked like he hadn't slept. "I've been going through the bank's records," Timothy said without preamble. "The foreclosure notice. It's not legal. Thomas Lane's loan was paid off 2 months before he died." "That's impossible," Abby said. "He was broke, gambling everything away." That's what everyone thought, but look. Timothy spread papers on the table. Here's the original loan, and here's a receipt showing payment in full, signed by Thomas himself. Caleb studied the documents. Where did the money come from? That's where it gets interesting. The payment was made by something called the Frontier Development Company. Ring any bells? Rebecca inhaled sharply. That's one of Benson's shell companies. I've seen that name in Harrington's files. So Benson paid off Thomas's loan? Abby looked confused. Why would... Her face paled as understanding dawned. Oh, God, Thomas was working for him. More than working, Timothy continued grimly. I found other payments, regular amounts every month for services rendered. Your husband was on Benson's payroll. Mrs. Lane, Mrs. Morgan. Abby sank into a chair. The late nights, the mysterious meetings, the money that appeared and disappeared. I thought it was all gambling. Some of it probably was, Caleb said gently. But it explains why Crow was so determined to get this place. It wasn't about the debt, it was about maintaining Benson's network. There's more, Timothy said. I found correspondence in Mr. Harmon's private files. Benson's been buying up land all along the proposed railroad route. He needs this property to complete his holdings. The railroad's coming through here, Rebecca asked. Within the year, the boarding house sits right where the depot would go. Worth 10 times what it is now, maybe more. Caleb felt pieces clicking into place. So Thomas was helping Benson acquire land, probably through intimidation or forged documents. When he was killed, the operation fell apart. Rebecca finished. Benson sent Crow to get Abby to continue the work, and when that failed, he decided to take a more direct approach, Abby said quietly. All this death and pain over money and land. It's always about money and land, Caleb said. Question is, what do we do about it? Before anyone could answer, horses thundered down Main Street, through the window. They could see Sheriff Dawes riding with a group of men strangers in city clothes who looked as out of place as wolves in a sheep pen. Federal marshals, Rebecca identified. I recognize the one in front Jacob Stern. He's in Benson's pocket. Dawes knocked on the door with unusual authority. Open up, got federal warrants here. Caleb checked his guns while Abby straightened her dress. Let them in, he said, but everybody stay calm. Dawes entered with 4 marshals, Stern in the lead. The federal man was thin and cold-eyed, with the look of someone who enjoyed his authority. Caleb Morgan, Stern announced. You're under arrest for desertion, murder, and treason against the United States government. Those charges were dismissed 12 years ago, Caleb said evenly. New evidence has come to light. Seems you've been hiding quite a history. Major Morgan, or should I say, Captain Trent. Abby looked at Caleb in confusion. Trent? My mother's maiden name, he explained. I used it for a while after the war. Among other aliases, Stern continued. You've been a busy man, gun running, hired killing, even a little train robbery if our sources are right. Your sources are lying. Maybe, but you'll have plenty of time to prove that at trial. Assuming you make it that far. Stern's smile was reptilian. Lot of accidents happen during transport. You can't just take him. Abby stepped forward. He has rights. Ma'am, I'd advise you to step back before I arrest you for interfering with federal officers. Stern looked around the room, his gaze settling on Rebecca. Miss Foster, Major Benson sends his regards. Rebecca's hand moved toward her rifle, but Caleb shook his head slightly. It's all right, he said. I'll go peacefully. No need for anyone to get hurt. Caleb, no, Abby grabbed his arm. This is just another of Benson's schemes. I know, but fighting federal marshals won't help our cause. He cupped her face gently. Trust me, this isn't over. Dawes looked uncomfortable as he produced shackles. Sorry about this. Morgan, just following orders. I know you are, Sheriff. As they let him out, Half the town had gathered to watch. Some faces showed satisfaction, the troublemaker finally getting his due. But more showed concern, even anger. The battle at Devil's Canyon had changed perspectives. "This ain't right," someone called out. "Since when do federal marshals care about our troubles?" another added. Judge Fairweather pushed through the crowd. "Marshal Stern, I'll need to see those warrants. As circuit judge, I have jurisdiction. Not over federal matters." Stern cut him off. "Stand aside, old man." They loaded Caleb into a prison wagon, the kind used for transporting dangerous criminals. Through the bars, he could see Abby standing on the boarding house porch, Rebecca beside her, both women refusing to show the fear he knew they felt. "Where are you taking him?" Abby demanded. "Federal court in Denver." Stern replied. "Should take about a week to get there. Lot of empty country between here and there. Dangerous territory." The threat was clear. Caleb would never make it to Denver alive. As the wagon rolled out, Caleb caught sight of someone in an upstairs window of the hotel, a man in an expensive suit, watching with satisfaction. Theodore Benson himself, come to see his plan unfold. Their eyes met across the distance, and Benson raised his glass in a mocking salute. The wagon rumbled out of town, 4 marshals riding escort. Caleb tested his shackles' solid work. No give, but he'd been in worse spots. The key was patience, waiting for the right moment. That moment came sooner than expected. They were 5 miles out of town when riders appeared on the horizon, not Benson's men, but Apaches, painted for war and moving fast. "Indians!" one of the marshals shouted. Stern cursed. "Form up, protect the wagon." The attack was swift and brutal. Arrows whistled through the air, finding gaps in the marshals' defenses. Gunfire echoed across the desert as the lawmen tried to fight back, but they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. In the chaos, Caleb noticed something odd. The Apaches were focusing on the marshals, avoiding the wagon entirely. When one brave rode close, Caleb saw his face clearly and almost laughed. It was Samuel Runningwater, a half-Apache scout he'd served with years ago. His face painted, but his cavalry tattoo visible on his forearm. "Hold on, Major," Samuel called in English before wheeling away. The battle was over in minutes. 2 marshals were down, the others fleeing back toward town. The wagon driver had abandoned his post at the first arrow, leaving Caleb alone in the rolling cage. Samuel rode up, grinning. "Good to see you, Caleb, though you look better without the iron jewelry." "Sam, what are you doing here?" "Miss Foster sent word through the telegraph office. Said you might need help. Lucky for you, my band was passing through." He produced a key lifted from Stern during the fight and freed Caleb's hands. "She also said to tell you the ladies are handling things back in town. Your job is to get to Denver alive." "Oh, the warrants are probably real, knowing Benson. But that prosecutor Rebecca mentioned Thornton. He's real too, and he's waiting for your testimony." Samuel handed him a gun belt. "My cousin's got horses waiting over that rise. You remember the old trails?" "I remember." "Then ride, my friend. We'll make sure your escort has other things to worry about." As Caleb mounted the waiting horse, he looked back toward Deadwood Gulch. Leaving Abby felt like tearing off a piece of his soul. But Samuel was right, the legal battle had to be fought in Denver. Benson had overplayed his hand, using federal authority for personal gain. That was the kind of corruption Thornton could use. "Tell them I'll be back," he said. "They know," Samuel replied. "That woman of yours, she's already planning your welcome home party, assuming there's a town left to come home to." "What do you mean?" "Benson's not just after you. Word is he's called in more guns. Plans to take the whole town if necessary. Your wife and Miss Foster are organizing the defense." Caleb felt pride and fear in equal measure. "Look after them, Sam." "They don't need looking after, but I'll keep an eye out anyway." He clasped Caleb's arm. "Ride fast, testify true, and come back alive. That's how you win this war." Caleb nodded and spurred his horse north. Behind him, he could hear renewed gunfire as Samuel's band kept the marshals busy. Ahead lay Denver and the chance to finally bring Benson to justice. But his heart remained in Deadwood Gulch, with a green-eyed woman who'd taught him that some things were worth fighting for, worth living for, worth coming home to. The sun climbed higher as he rode, and despite everything, the danger, the separation, the uncertainty, Caleb found himself smiling. For the first time in his life, he wasn't running from something. He was riding toward it. 3 weeks had passed since Caleb rode north. 3 weeks of testimony, legal battles, and revelations that shook the territorial government. William Thornton had proven to be everything Rebecca promised: incorruptible, brilliant, and determined to see justice done. Now, as the train carried Caleb back toward Deadwood Gulch, he held 2 documents that changed everything: Benson's arrest warrant and a federal injunction protecting Abby's property rights. The trial would take months, but Benson's network was crumbling. Men who'd seemed untouchable were fleeing or turning state's evidence. The train whistle announced their approach to Millfield Station, the closest stop to Deadwood Gulch. Through the window, Caleb saw a familiar figure waiting on the platform. Rebecca Foster, dressed for hard riding and grinning like Christmas had come early. "About time," she said as he stepped down. "Your wife's been driving everyone crazy with preparations." Preparations. For your homecoming, among other things. Her expression sobered. "Benson's holed up in town with about 20 men. He knows the marshals are coming, figures to make his last stand where it all started." Abby. Safe, stubborn as ever, and currently teaching the townswomen how to shoot. Rebecca led him to waiting horses. "She's turned that boarding house into a fortress. Even got old Martha Pritchard manning a rifle." They rode hard across familiar terrain, the landscape both harsh and beautiful in the afternoon light. As they crested the final rise before town, Caleb pulled up short. Deadwood Gulch had transformed. Barricades blocked the main streets. Armed citizens patrolled the rooftops. The boarding house flew a new flag handmade, with Liberty stitched in bold letters. "After you left, Benson tried to take over," Rebecca explained. "Claimed emergency powers. Said the town was in rebellion. That's when Abby stood up in the town meeting and gave a speech about freedom and justice that would have made the Founding Fathers proud. And people listened. They did more than listen. They remembered who they were: free Americans, not subjects of some would-be emperor. Even Sheriff Dawes finally found his backbone. They entered town carefully, challenged by guards who broke into smiles when they recognized Caleb. Word spread quickly, and by the time they reached the boarding house, a crowd had gathered. But Caleb only had eyes for the woman standing on the porch, her honey hair glowing in the sunset, that familiar green dress he loved, and a smile that made every hard mile worth it. "Abby," he breathed. She flew down the steps and into his arms, heedless of propriety or the watching crowd. Their kiss drew cheers and a few good-natured whistles. "You came back," she whispered against his lips. "I promised I would." "Yes, but given your history with staying put." She pulled back, eyes bright with tears and laughter. "Welcome home, husband." The crowd pressed in, then handshakes, backslaps, questions about Denver and the trial. But Judge Fairweather's voice cut through the celebration. "Hate to interrupt, but we've got a situation. Benson's making his move." From the hotel across the street, armed men emerged. Benson himself in the lead. The corrupt official had lost weight, his expensive suit hanging loose, his face haggard but eyes still burning with entitled rage. "Morgan," he called out. "I should have killed you at Millbrook Ridge when I had the chance." "Probably," Caleb agreed, gently moving Abby behind him. "But you were always better at killing prisoners than soldiers." Those weren't soldiers. They were traitors. Every one of them. They were boys, some as young as 15, surrendered, unarmed, begging for mercy. Caleb's voice carried clearly. And you butchered them like cattle. I followed orders. You exceeded orders and enjoyed it, just like you've enjoyed crushing people under your boot ever since. Caleb held up the documents. It's over. Benson, federal marshals will be here by nightfall. Surrender now, and at least you'll get a trial. A trial? Benson laughed bitterly. Like the one you gave my career, my life, you self-righteous bastard. You took everything from me. You took it from yourself the day you chose cruelty over honor. Benson's face twisted. Then let's finish this the way we should have years ago. He unbuckled his gun belt. Let it fall. Single combat. You and me. Winner walks away free. Caleb, no, Abby protested. You don't have to prove anything. But Caleb was already removing his own weapons. Yes, I do. This ghost has haunted me long enough. They met in the middle of the street as the sun touched the horizon. No seconds, no ceremony, just two men carrying the weight of history between them. Benson struck first. A cavalry saber appearing in his hand, he'd always favored the blade. Caleb dodged, muscle memory from a dozen battlefield duels taking over. They circled, testing each other's defenses. You were always too soft. Benson sneered, slashing viciously. That's why you never made full colonel? No stomach for the hard choices. Like murdering children, Caleb caught the blade on his arm, accepting the cut to get inside Benson's guard. His fist connected solidly, sending the older man stumbling. They grappled, rolling in the dust. Years of rage and guilt fueling their strikes. Benson was skilled but desperate. Caleb was younger but holding back, still fighting his own nature. Kill him, someone from Benson's gang shouted. No, that was Abby, her voice cutting through everything. Caleb Morgan, you listen to me. You are not a killer. You are the man I love, the man who defended strangers, who stood up for what's right. Don't let him drag you back into darkness. Her words pierced the red haze of battle. Caleb saw himself as if from above, rolling in the dirt with his past, becoming again what he'd fought so hard to leave behind. With a surge of strength, he pinned Benson, fist raised for the killing blow. The man who'd haunted his nightmares lay helpless beneath him, face bloodied, eyes finally showing fear. Do it, Benson gasped. Finish what you started. Caleb's fist trembled. Then, slowly, he lowered it. No, you're going to live. Benson, live and face justice. Face the families of those you killed. Face yourself in a cell every day knowing what you've done. He stood, offering his hand. It's over. Benson stared at the extended hand, then laughed a broken sound. You really have gone soft. He pulled a hidden derringer from his boot, the small gun rising toward Caleb's heart. The shot echoed down Main Street. Benson jerked, the derringer falling from nerveless fingers. Behind him, Abby stood with her father's smoking revolver, face pale but hands steady. I told you, she said quietly. We protect what's ours. Benson collapsed, clutching his shoulder where Abby's bullet had found its mark, wounded but alive. His men threw down their weapons, unwilling to face the aroused town alone. As Doc Holcomb tended to Benson, federal marshals, the real ones, rode in with Colonel Harrington, very much alive and ready to testify. The arrests were swift and orderly, the end of an era of corruption. Later, as the moon rose over Deadwood Gulch, Caleb and Abby stood on their porch, watching the town celebrate. The boarding house was full again, guests drawn by the story of the widow and the gunslinger who'd fought for justice and found love. I've been thinking, Abby said, leaning into his embrace. Dangerous habit. She elbowed him gently. About the future, the railroad's coming, the town's growing. We could expand, maybe build a proper hotel. Unless you're planning on wandering off again. Never. He turned her to face him. But there's something I need to do first. From his pocket, he pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. Inside was Thomas Lane's mandolin, restrung and polished. Found a craftsman in Denver who could restore it. He explained. Thought maybe it's time to let it make music again. New songs for a new life. Abby's eyes filled as she took the instrument, fingers finding familiar chords. The melody that spilled out was sweet and clear, speaking of sorrow transformed to joy, of endings that became beginnings. Play something happy, someone called from the street. Something we can dance to. Soon the whole town seemed to be dancing, spinning in the dusty street under stars that had witnessed so much pain and now bore witness to celebration. Even Judge Fairweather was coaxed into a stately waltz with Martha Pritchard. Is this what you were looking for? Abby asked as they swayed together. When you rode into town all those weeks ago? No, Caleb admitted. I was looking for a place to hide. Instead, I found a place to live. And a rather troublesome wife. The very best kind. As the music played and the town danced, Caleb thought about the journey that had brought them here, the violence and redemption, the courage found in unexpected places, the love that bloomed in the harsh soil of the frontier. The West was still wild, still dangerous. There would be other challenges, other battles, but standing here with Abby in his arms, surrounded by a community that had chosen hope over fear, Caleb knew they were ready for whatever came next. The boarding house sign creaked in the night breeze, but now it sounded like a welcome rather than a warning. Home. It seemed to say, "You're home." Rebecca appeared at his shoulder, grinning. Not bad for a washed-up gunslinger and a stubborn widow. We had help, Abby said, smiling at her friend. Well, I'm moving on tomorrow. Thornton's got another case. More corruption to root out. She raised her glass. But I'll know where to find you if I need backup. Always, Caleb promised. The party continued late into the night, a celebration of survival and new beginnings. And when the last dancer had gone home and the last lamp was dimmed, Caleb and Abby stood together in their rebuilt parlor, looking out at the town they'd helped save. No regrets, she asked. Only one. What's that? That it took me so long to find you. She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, not lonely now, but wild and free and alive. Just like them. The end. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope you enjoyed following Caleb and Abby's journey as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Are you driving through your own frontier, relaxing at home, or perhaps on a long journey? Please leave a comment below and let's share our thoughts about this tale of courage, redemption, and love in the American frontier. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to Wild West Night for more tales from the untamed frontier. Hit that like button if this story touched your heart. And don't forget to press the hype button to help more people discover these stories of the Old West. Your support means the world and helps keep these tales alive for everyone who loves the romance and adventure of the Wild West. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward your own sunrise.